Welcome to RCR Insights. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and our topic today is indoor small cells. And I'm joined today by Mike Schabel. He is Vice President for Small Cells at Alcatel-Lucent. Mike, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Also here today is Peter Jarek, Vice President at Current Analysis. Peter, thanks for making the time today.
Thank you, Martha. Thanks to everyone tuning in.
And Ronnie Heraldsvik is here. He is Chief Marketing Officer at SpiderCloud Wireless. Ronnie, it's good to see you again.
Hi, Martha.
So we're going to start off by hearing just a little bit about use cases and recent deployments. Mike, would you like to start us off? I know that your most recent news is not about indoor small cells, but go ahead and remind us about that anyway.
Yeah, thanks. So we're very excited to have made a lot of progress in the outdoor small cell space, really moving the ball forward on demonstrating multi-vendor head nets and multi-vendor deployments inside of especially across Europe. So we had a very nice recent announcement with Vodafone that was happening last week on the outdoor environment. Very excited about that. Moving into the indoor market, I think it's really a very interesting market. It's especially challenging because, in fact, I would argue it's one of the most challenging environments that are out there because we have such a wide number of deployment cases that we have to worry about. So not only is your product perspective because difficult, you need to take care of the 3G, you need to take care of 4G, you need to take care of migrations from 3 to 4 for operators and refarming their spectrum. You have the challenge that LTE has every imaginable frequency that is possibly available. So from a product perspective, it means that we have a lot of different product variants and operators have a lot of product variants to deal with. You have Wi-Fi in there that needs to be sorted and make sure that the operators have a good, clean strategy in how they handle Wi-Fi indoors. But in fact, actually, as well, it's the real deployment challenge. And I've said many times publicly, you know, operators are brilliant at securing the contracts for that enterprise, those enterprise customers or those indoor customers. But moving into actually deploying inside of the buildings is presenting itself to be the next big challenge for everybody to solve.
Now, Ronnie, I know you spend a significant amount of time talking to those enterprise customers. What are you hearing?
Well, absolutely, and building upon what you just said, I mean, it's taking it a step further. You know, when it comes to the larger enterprises and the IT departments, it has to be non-intrusive too when it comes to solving the problems for the enterprise customers. So that means that we can't come with a telco-friendly approach into that environment, and it also has to be a system and a deployment that can't take weeks and months to deploy. So it has to be a collaborative process between not just the network engineers inside of the operator, but at the same time it has to be an IT-friendly approach with the customer themselves. So what we're hearing, loud and clear, and we've been hearing several years now, is that it has to be a simple approach that where we do the, and therefore coming in with a land-friendly approach that can be deployed in a matter of weeks or even days. So that type of approach takes a significant change in the internal process of the operator, and I think that's something that both myself and Mike Schabel from Alcatel-Lucent knows, that takes change inside of the operator, and that in itself is really key to the adoption process inside of the enterprise. At the same time, also the operator to get small cells into the enterprises. So but I think we're getting there. That's what we all been working on over the last couple of years inside of the small cell forum. So we're seeing tremendous progress there, and that's, I think, is key to the adoption here in 2014 and into next year.
Okay, great. Peter, what do you think? Are operators making the progress? Are they moving towards small cells at the rate you thought they would?
Yeah, I mean, so we are lucky that we don't do forecasts. We would have gotten it wrong. Everyone else who does forecasts. I can tell you, I don't see the forecasts that other firms do, but every vendor I talk to says that the forecasts have been off, which tells me that the market has not seen operators move as quickly as we all expected. I think the bigger part of that, though, is what Ronnie just alluded to, is that it takes change within the operators, right? Because operators have talked about for years the enterprise is a huge opportunity, and they want to go into the enterprise, and there's a great thing to we can deliver managed mobility, and mobility as a service for the enterprise is a wonderful thing that we can offer, and it's been tough for the operators to get there, I think, because, like Ronnie said, it takes a change in how they operate, and I personally don't believe that operators, as much as they think they know the enterprise deeply enough, right? That they think they know the enterprise, but all the different vertical needs and all the different requirements in terms of deployments and operations and everything, I think it's more complicated than they believe, and they're figuring that stuff out, but it does take time. I think that's a big part of, I think, where I see some of the holdup taking place.
Now, do you see the challenge mostly on the technical front, or is it more on the organizational or business model front?
So I don't think you can separate those out, right? I mean, I think from a technical standpoint, right, it's the operational of who's going to control it within the enterprise. Do you have to have something that the enterprise controls versus the carrier controls? How quickly can you get it deployed? How unobtrusive can it be? Those seem like technical things, but they're also operational in terms of just running it and deploying it, and so I think those are all connected.
Are enterprises understanding what small cells are and asking for that technology, or is it still something that the operator brings to them? Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, as I speak to the large deployers of Wi-Fi, right, because they're the ones that are out there in the buildings deploying some sort of wireless kit today, they are commenting that their customers are asking more and more for a cellular-based solution. I'm not sure that they completely understand it yet because given their experiences with DAS, distributed antenna systems, they're looking for neutral host in all cases. And I think small cells, by nature, the fact that there's some integral pieces that belong to the operator are not inherently neutral host today. I think there are pathways to get there, but they're not today. And so the enterprises don't necessarily understand I need to have a flavor for operator A, maybe a flavor for operator B, or a flavor for operator C. But I think that education is coming in the market. It's certainly being asked for, though.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, you brought up two very important topics, neutral host and Wi-Fi. And you brought up small cells as an alternative to Wi-Fi, but what about integrated solutions? Is that something that, is there a lot of demand for that, Mike?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I didn't even mean to imply that it was an alternative.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood then.
Whoops.
So they want integrated small cells that incorporate Wi-Fi.
Yeah, indeed. Everything that we're doing today has an integrated Wi-Fi in it, I think, as demanded by the market, and we're not alone in that space. I think it does require a little bit more thinking about how we're going to handle the fact that many enterprises already have Wi-Fi today. So when we come into that building and co-deploy a Wi-Fi with a co-packaged solution with cellular, and how is it that we get it to perfectly work with the Wi-Fi that's already there? I think those are the key challenges that we need to work through. It's certainly possible, certainly straightforward to. I'm sorry, not straightforward to do. Needs to get done with respect to that, but all the products that we have to deploy have that and are required to have that in there.
Is that true for you as well, Ronnie?
Well, I want to get back to what Mike said earlier. I mean, when it comes to the whole thing about DAS, I mean, for the last 10 years, the enterprises have been conditioned to think about DAS and buying DAS and paying for DAS because it was such a expensive proposition. It has to be shared among different operators, so that it was an operator shared type of solution. So you have to divvy up the cost between the different operators. That's actually how it was done, because it was too expensive for one operator to bear the cost of it, and very often some of that cost was passed on to the enterprise. When it comes to small cells, it's cost effective enough for an operator to pay for that solution themselves and make that a cost effective and a competitive solution vis-a-vis the other operators, so they can actually pay for it and go and deploy it, which is what some of our customers are doing in Europe. Paying for it and deploying it and making that a competitive solution vis-a-vis the other operators. So, when it comes to the enterprises, they're sometimes maybe asking for, well, multi-operator small cells. Well, why would you want that? Well, they'd be just conditioned to ask for it. Instead of going, well, if operator X, Y, or Z can come in and actually fix the problem for you and they can pay for it, is that of interest to you? And the resounding answer is yes. So in that case, why would you, the enterprise, want to pay for it yourself? And they kind of come back with the, well, we wouldn't want to necessarily because we don't necessarily want to manage our own cellular. We're not cellular experts. So when you have a conversation with the enterprise IT, departments, they don't want to manage their own DAS, nor do they actually want to manage their own small cells. So when you just engage them in the conversation and find out, and they find out that an operator can actually come in and fix the problem for them. Multi-operator is no longer means 4 operators. Very often multi-operator means 2 operators. In that case, that problem can be easily solved. So it's just a matter of engaging them in the conversation and finding out what they really need, and solve the problem accordingly.
Right, you bring up a good point. If one small cell could accommodate AT&T and Verizon, that might be huge. Peter, what do you think about multi-vendor neutral host small cells?
I think the difficulty is it's part of what Ronnie mentions in terms of what folks have been conditioned to expect, right, in terms of DAS. But I think it's also the question of what do they want, right? Are you going to the enterprise and this enterprise saying, I really need strong coverage from AT&T, or I really need strong coverage from Vodafone, or just I really need strong cellular coverage? And I think we've gone to more and more on the enterprise side of BYOD business model, right, where we're not talking about here is the one operator that the entire company has a relationship with, but everyone's, it's basically employee liable or some sort of BYOD, in which case, which one do you pick, right? And I think from the perspective that Ronnie was talking about, yeah, it's nice if an operator can come and say, well, I want to make sure that your employees choose Vodafone, or I can improve the Vodafone coverage. But from the enterprise standpoint, they just know they have a bunch of employees who may be on a bunch of different operators, and they want to make sure that they have solid coverage for all those operators. And so I think that's where you have this interest in multi-carrier or neutral host.
And how long do you think it will be before that is actually in development or available?
It really comes down to the question here is whose interest is it to go multi-operator? Is it for the enterprise to buy it and manage it themselves, or is it for the CommScopes to go and install it and manage it on behalf of the enterprises? That really is sort of the question.
And what do you think? Whose interest is it in? Nobody's?
Well, hold on. I think Peter has hit it on the head, which is what you're trying to hit. What's the value prop for this, and who are you serving? And a lot of enterprises today are BYOD type environments, which mean employees bring in their own handset. So I think the thing that we have to look at is are we delivering a public access service inside of the building, which is just whatever I want to do, voice and data, or are we delivering an enterprise utility, an enterprise integrated function? And both of them are possible with cellular, but those are 2 very different types of use cases. And I'll equate it to something that's similar to Wi-Fi. When we think of Wi-Fi, we think of it as both providing public access, and we see it as providing very enterprise-specific SSIDs that are secured and allow you into the intranet. I think the value equation, the neutral host question, I think needs to be pulled back into, is it a public access service or is it an enterprise integrated specific service? And I think if it's integrated with the enterprise functionality, then all of a sudden this neutral host thing goes away. If it's not as important of a decision because it's integrated into enterprise IT, and by gosh, that better be fairly well controlled and secured and specific. If it's public access, then I think we'll always have a neutral host type requirement, but I don't see that as being as much an economic driver for the deployment of indoor small cells, that at least from what I'm seeing. I don't know if others have different perspectives.
Okay, that's very, very well put. And in most of your conversations, which do you see, an enterprise IT controlled environment or a public access requirement?
I think the requirements are still being fleshed out, because I'll bring it back to the discussion at the beginning. I think we're just now starting to see a legitimate enterprise demand for in-building cellular, and so it's only And I think part of that is just coming from frustration that you don't have indoor coverage, and I think that indoor coverage and service is more of a public access type requirement. But I think some very savvy enterprise IT or CIOs have been saying, look, I want to unbundle or unwire my network in my building. In an unwired network, I need to have a critical enterprise infrastructure. So we see them both coming, but I don't know that they're converged in sort of a simple way that is easy to articulate in a call like this.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, one other topic I'd like to touch on before we finish is the software that's becoming increasingly important for small cells. Peter, I know that you spend quite a bit of time looking at telecom software, and I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the importance for small cells in particular of things like self-optimizing network software.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because I think on the SON side of things, there's no doubt that one of the early issues and questions regarding small cells in general was how do we make sure these things don't interfere with each other, and you saw a lot of conflation of interference mitigation tools versus SON tools, and a SON outdoor interference mitigation is indoor, and I think we are seeing that it really is part of, whereas you're going to have a multi-layer network, that it all has to be connected. And so I think, to me, it seems like that doesn't get enough attention, particularly on the SON side of things. Like, you don't hear people talking about that as a differentiator, and it's either because we've got it figured out or because we just sort of assume that it works. But particularly as, if we go back to the idea that I think both Mike and Ronnie have been talking about, and then we each think it's going to scale here, right? That we get to a place where this is going to scale, then rolling it out in the deployment side needs to scale as well, and making sure that we have the tools to make sure that the networks are optimized and that the indoors doesn't unduly impact the outdoors and vice versa, and that within the indoors we can make sure we're deploying this to actually scale from a capacity and coverage standpoint. That's critical. And now how you roll that out and how that SON solution is architected is obviously a competitive differentiator for a number of the vendors, but I don't think we hear that enough, or at least as much as I would like to.
Okay, great. Well, let's hear from each of these vendors about their SON solutions. Ronnie, do you want to start?
Yeah, no, the mantra of our company back in December 2007 up on a whiteboard was, don't mess with the macro. That has not changed since then, and I think that rings true in our SON software, from how we deploy and how we integrate with the macro when we get deployed. We are a part of the macro when we get deployed into any of the operators' networks. We see the neighbor list. We don't mess with it. If you see a strong signal at the edge of the building, our radios scale back, and we integrate with the operator's network, and that's actually how we get deployed. So we are an integral part of that network, when it comes to the use of the existing bands and frequencies and so forth. So that's part of how we get deployed. And SON, from a self-organizing, self-optimizing, from a how the speed of our deployment and how we integrate, that's key to our success, and that's how we work.
Okay, great, thank you. And it's important for Alcatel-Lucent as well. Mike, do you want to tell us about it?
Sure. I would say there's maybe two sides of it. In one sense, I agree with what Ronnie's saying. You absolutely need to be sorry, I have a distraction here. You need to not mess with the macro. And I would say in the in-building environment, we figured out that it's important that these devices work with each other and interoperate with each other very, very well. And I think Ronnie understands this. I think we understand this, that arguably in the in-building environment, doing handoffs from device to device, power adaptive control between these devices, we were doing things like around SON before SON was defined in 3G, in those types of architectures. Now I think we're talking about a bigger layer of SON, which is the macro and the small cell, so I'll call it headnet SON for lack of a better definition. And the question is, how do we handle all the mobility events between the indoor environment into the outdoor environment, so that way when you walk and transition from your in-building infrastructure into that macro environment, your call doesn't drop and your service doesn't drop. That's another layer of SON which we're working on, and that's where, in fact, actually you do have to pay, you have to look at the neighbor lists, and I would argue even go so far as making sure that the macro is really paying attention to what's happening in that small cell. And that's something that we've also been focused on a lot, and I think by nature of our outdoor business have a very good understanding of what that metro-macro interaction looks like, and that facilitates our ability to go from indoors to outdoors without dropping calls and dropping performance and service. It's a very difficult subject, but I think the key for us is remain open, because there are multiple layers of SON. And there's the CSON type approach, and there's lots of trade names floating around. We have to have a better understanding of the market as to how to define these and divide them all up. But I think when it comes to the CSON type application, this is something where we've taken a very open strategy. There's some very good architects out there, or good companies out there that we're interoperating with both at the macro and small cell layer to make sure that we're enabling them to succeed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we are about out of time. Peter, as the analyst on the call, do you have any final comments that you want to share before we finish?
Any big picture, giant sort of something philosophical? No.
Okay.
I think to sort of end that on the conversation, sort of where Mike was going. I think just to follow up on that, I think he's completely right that thinking about the HetNet SON is probably the next question that really the industry is going to be sort of thinking about. And I was struck by one of the smaller announcements out of the Small Cell World Summit from last month, where you had Qualcomm, who essentially was really talking about, it was kind of quiet, I don't know how well it was seen, but this idea of inside-out coverage, right, where we're talking about the idea that we're going to light up outdoor areas from inside with some of these small cells. And when we get to that level of thinking, what does that do in terms of the interaction between indoor and outdoor? Right? It's no longer this idea that indoors, indoor, outdoors, outdoor, and that wall provides some barrier that means that we can separate those. And I think it's a good problem to have, but it's just going to get more and more complex. And so we're going to have to think about how we handle those challenges.
All right. Well, we do look forward to our outdoor small cell panel later this summer. And thank you all very much for joining us today. Peter Jarrett from Current Analysis, Mike Schabel from Alcatel-Lucent, and Ronnie Heraldsvik from SpiderCloud Wireless. Thank you all very much for being here today.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks, Martha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.